welcome to Future Campus. We this week are looking at what's happening in the health and medical workforce of our universities around Australia. We've got George Taiaroa from the University of Melbourne joining us. George, thanks very much for your time.
No, thanks, Tim. Good to be here.
Now, tell us about your new report. I gather this is the first time there's been a national look at how early and mid-career researchers are going in the health and medical workforce.
Yeah, exactly. The aim of this research was to provide a really good evidence base for how early and mid-career healthcare professionals, academics are doing. We touched on a few aspects of workplace culture, but other elements of well-being. And for me personally, the really interesting piece is kind of how they view the profession that they're working in, and is it a favorable place to be? How is it tracked over time? Because a lot of these individuals have been there for, a decade plus at this stage. So really nice insights into the kind of current state of play, if you like, of health and medical research and training in Australia.
So you had 660 respondents to your survey, really good sample size. I was really surprised to see perhaps that more than 80% would not recommend that other people become academics, essentially. I mean, obviously, there are some that sat on the fence in amongst that group and others who definitely would not recommend. But was that a surprise to you?
Yeah, we added that question in after a lot of kind of debate and back and forth around, because we tried to focus a lot of the survey items on things that have been done previously, and we could kind of compare to other workforces and other data sets. But this was a new question for us. And yeah, it took me by surprise for sure. I come from an academic kind of family. My parents were both professors back in New Zealand. And so I've kind of grown up, it's been the norm for me. And so to come over here and see, I guess, things in a different light was really interesting. I've been working at University of Melbourne for 6 or so years now. And so I personally haven't seen a lot of that change over time, but I like working in academia and I would like to stay here. And so to ask even me that question and say, would you recommend it to someone? I feel it's quite confronting to be like, it's currently not the best time to be in this workforce. And so maybe other options would be good. And I think that fits into the national psyche at the moment, where for young people, it's kind of, you need to focus on a trade and get a deposit for a house and that type of thing. And to try and encourage someone to study for 6, 7, 8 years and then come out into a workforce that's, a lot of short fixed term contracts and not very reliable employment. It's a tough ask, right?
Absolutely. And one of the things you say, in addition to that unstable funding, the short-term contracts, burnout, and also carer responsibilities were also really key and perhaps playing into that, do you think?
Yeah, I think the modern workforce kind of expects a few things from their employer. And one of those things is to have that support around taking caring leave, be it if you're male or female. So we had a question in the survey around, did you have responsibilities as a carer, either as a parent or caring for the elderly or disabled, or other forms of caring? And more than half of academics have caring responsibilities. And so to have that recognized by their employer and kind of accommodated is really important. And so the universities themselves can maybe kind of take that and think about how you can, have different resources or facilities available for parents. And I think it also speaks to, would you recommend the profession, that question as well, in that you have that inherent instability as an academic or someone in that kind of health and medical training. And so it's hard to plan a family and to have a house and that type of thing. And so, just a lot to consider in that period. A lot of our respondents were in their, 30s as our kind of main bracket, as they do take a while to study and come out the other side with a PhD or MD or equivalent degree. So it's kind of the prime period where people are trying to family plan and settle down.
Given that we work in a sector where there are a lot of older workers, and it can be sometimes hard to break through into a more senior level, do you think career progression is a challenge for the people in the survey?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of a maybe decade-old thing after reforms around NHMRC and what grants are available, but there's a bit of a gap at the moment for that mid-career group that maybe haven't excelled, haven't been the tippity top as they've come out of their PhDs, but are still working and doing great research, doing great training and teaching. But how do we keep them in the workforce without them just kind of falling away? So a really important question, and I'm not sure we've got the right kind of framework at the moment to keep those people and keep them around. Um, it's really important. I can see it myself in where I work at the Doherty Institute in Melbourne, where there are some people that, for lack of a better word, are kind of forever postdocs that are fantastic researchers and are really well equipped and kind of almost run the labs while other professors might do the grants and do the admin and the outside, but they're kind of really key to keeping the system going.
On the institutional level, these sort of statistics would indicate that you're likely to see significant churn in early and mid-career health researchers as they look towards that lab or that location where there's a more supportive workforce and an environment where they have a better fit, which is great for institutions that have that. What do we need to do on a national level? And do you think, is there any sign of a national plan to start to address this?
Yeah, we were hoping that our evidence base from this work might inform some of the responses to the University Accord, which I'm sure you're familiar with and your viewers are, which was very much focused on the kind of training side of it and having that equity approach. There wasn't much discussed around the research, and in particular the early and mid-career researchers, and how we can better equip them and make sure that that workforce is growing to kind of accommodate the teaching requirements, in particular for the Accords going ahead, but also the research going forward. It's still, equally important that we invest into research. And we did some kind of looking back at budgets of the past, and although it might look, say, NHMRC's relatively stable funding over the last decade, if you adjust for inflation, we're, tracking down, and ARC's probably worse, maybe 20% lower than it was 10 years ago. And so we're expecting researchers to kind of keep making these breakthroughs and, invigorating the sector, but we're getting less and less funding each year. So for me personally, I think we should be looking at that and have that on the table as something that, national government, Commonwealth government could address and potentially increase funding for higher education in that way, be it through the MRFF or other streams. I'm not too sure, but I think it's important that we, have a stable funding base, particularly as people were trying to plan out, an 8-year degree and then have a workforce come out the other side of it.
Were there any other findings out of all the research? Obviously, you've got a lot of detail come through that were a surprise, or that you'd think people should take a bit more note of?
One of the big ones that we've been presenting at a few universities that people are really receptive of is we found people that have really good supervisor support view the profession a lot better. It's almost night and day. So if you have a supervisor that's supportive, there for you, kind of helps to plan out grants and your career progression, it's, your would you recommend academia shoots through the roof, and all these other responses are just a lot more positive. And so I think universities can potentially have better training or other ways to increase that supervisory experience and make it positive. I think certain courses are also on the cards. So at University of Melbourne and Monash, who a group of Monash researchers co-led this work, each of our faculties have kind of career progression courses that people can go to and maybe spend 4 or 5 days and go through focused, what are your next steps, and have a mentor and kind of have training that's outside of your day-to-day in the lab type thing.
And so what would you hope would be the next step? I mean, clearly this is really valuable insights. We're getting it out there to policymakers and so on. But, short of waiting for the government to put its hand in its wallet and provide more money, what can the sector do next with this sort of information?
Yeah, I think closely read the report is the start, because there's a lot in there, and we've spent a lot of time and consulted a few groups to kind of see what's a reasonable ask, both for universities and Commonwealth governments, and kind of increasing the support for early mid-career academics and improving that workplace culture. But yeah, I think the kind of that locus of control should start with universities. There are things that we can do, and the obvious one, at least for me, is if you say have a 4-year grant, you should be encouraged to employ someone for the life of that grant rather than kind of rolling 1-year employment cycles within that. For that individual, that would be huge. It means they could potentially, get a better mortgage rate and all these other things that kind of come with that stability of 4 years rather than just 12 months. And so a number of universities are looking at doing that, and it's yeah, it comes with a few other kind of considerations. Maybe you need to look at different probationary periods and other models there, but to just have someone employed for the life of the grant might be a good start there.
Fantastic. Well, thanks very much for your time, George. I really commend you for the report. It's one of the best presented pieces of research that I've seen in a long time. It's really accessible, but also has a wealth of detail in there, asking questions that really need to be asked and are very useful to the sector. So thanks very much.
No, cheers, Tim. Thanks for having me.